Today is Halloween, my absolute favorite holiday. I was always the guy that went a little bit too hard on his yearly costume, as I'm sure you can probably tell. Bedsheet ghosts ain't got nothing on me. Anyway, this year I wanted to do something a little bit special to celebrate on the channel, so I wrote up a quick spooky Warhammer short story, and I figured I would read it to you all just as I do in my Lions of Gorgoth narrative kit bash series. We'll also be painting some Nightlords in the background, so slight spoilers, I guess. That said, this paint recipe was very much a test, and it didn't come out quite the way that I wanted it to. Writing the story ate up a lot of my content creation time this week, so the paint recipe kind of fell by the wayside and I couldn't develop it as much as I would like to. It's okay, I think, but still maybe not great. So while that will definitely be in the background, the main focus of this video is, of course, the story. So feel free to turn this on in the background while you do something else that might be a little bit more productive than watching me fail at painting Nightlords. But anyway, that's enough from me. Welcome to GoneHollowMinis, my name is Colt, and today we'll be talking spooky stories from the 41st millennium. Inquisitor Postulant Adaman watched the unshifting metal of the bridge's window shutters. The oil-slicked metal plating muted the kaleidoscopic shards of the Holy Blood stained-glassed bridge windows. The depictions of saints and sigils revered by the Holy Blood and her crew were rendered into barely discernible mosaics of blackened glass. The colorful mosaic would be an overindulgence on most other ships of the line, but the Holy Blood was not a ship of the line. The center of the darkened mural was a round rosette window, and within the roundel, to Adaman's continued amusement, was a different rosette. The Inquisitorial rosette, a great eye crested with an angular skull. The corners of an identical symbol, cast in hard brass and gemmed with garnet, dug hard into the flesh of his palm. "You'll draw blood if you keep that up." Senka Driss arched an eyebrow at him. The retinue's pistolier, her thumbs looped easily into the Groxhide gunbelt that cinched her maroon uniform. She was the only other member of the retinue on the bridge, the only other member who had been cleared from the medical bay. "Aye," the interrogator agreed, glancing down and forcing himself to loosen his grip. He watched the sharp white indents in his palm flush with blood. "Sorry." "Don't apologize to me," Senka shrugged, turning to lean on the railing. "It's not my knick-knack." Adaman felt his cheeks flush. "The Lord Dantelian died for this knick-knack." "Aye," Senka glanced at him from the corner of dark, flinty eyes. "He did, Inquisitor Postulant." Adaman grit his teeth and listened to the groaning warp shutters and the whispered murmurs of the Holy Blood's bridge crew. Junior Augur Chief Catalyst watched an impossibility. Made miniature, displayed on a screen, but an impossibility nonetheless. Pictured in two-dimensional green scan lines, a watery isometric view of the Holy Blood wavered in front of him. A dense grid of status runes cluttered the rest of the screen, all green except for one. "Enemy breach. Deploy defense team." A gnarled red rune blinked, a tiny klaxon and blinking indicator light ensuring he understood the severity. Still, Catalyst just blinked at it. "Chief," he motioned the Augur Master over, pointing to the bank of status runes. The Augur Master hobbled over, stiff-legged from an injury from the last time the Holy Blood had been in combat, well before Catalyst's station. "We've been breached." The Augur Master clamped a hand to the steel seat back of Catalyst's chair, breathing a sigh of calf and low sticks as he scanned through the green runes and studied the single red one. "Enemy breach, no other warnings, no hull venting, no combat alerts. Vid feed?" Catalyst punched a rune beneath the display. A grainy, shivering feed of the supposed breach opened, showing a hallway, empty and dimly lit. The feed wavered momentarily, dimming to black for a moment before slowly returning. It did so again a second later. Standard interference due to warp travel. Annoying, but ignorable. A maintenance servitor meandered into the vid screen's frame, one leg limping and the other stiff-legged. It crossed the screen slowly, but unmolested. "Better safe than..." the Augur Master trailed, turning back to his own readouts. "The Captain's Voidsmen might use something to do in this translation." Catalyst risked a look over his shoulder, to the promontory balcony where two of the late Inquisitor's retinue leaned heavily on the polished brass balustrade. "Augur Master, should we..." The old man followed his eyes and clenched his jaw. The late Inquisitor's pistolier and interrogator were hissing at each other in tones that they must have assumed no one else could hear. The interrogator cum Inquisitor postulant aimed an accusing finger. The pistolier turned to face him, one hand on the holster at her side. "They've got enough to worry about," the Augermaster concluded. "Best not." 30 standard minutes later, Catalyst watched a team of brass-armored voidsmen tramp towards the supposed breach. A few carried breaching shields, las rifles slung beneath their arms. The sergeant had doffed his helmet, slinging it onto his belt by the chin strap. Their shoulders sloped relaxedly under their thick brass gorgets. The translation interference turned their progress into a strange stop motion, the screen dipping into black and resuming a handful of yards down as the squad walked. Catalyst watched the sergeant run a hand over his bald head, checking his auspex with the other. On Catalyst's other screen, the sergeant's blip rune eclipsed the still red sigil of supposed enemy breach. The voidsmen fanned into the hallway, weapons still lazily slung over shoulders or across backs. The screen went black. Catalyst stared at himself in the reflection, counting seconds.
"Prone, dammit!"
The speaker grill mounted in Catalyst's display griped. He had lost visual, but not audio. The junior augur chief frowned, tapping on a rune to refresh the vid feed. The screen was still black, still blank. The officer squinted, barely able to make out the faint gray outlines of what had been the hallway.
"I said hit the caulking lights, dammit!" "Trying, sir, the panel's not working."
Catalyst sat forward. For a moment, quicker than he could blink, what little detail he could make out of the hallway was blotted away. The dim hallway had been dark, but now the screen was black. Deeper than black, deep enough to fall into. "Augermaster," Catalyst thought but couldn't say. The black vid feed shifted with barely seen patterns of noise, coruscating shadows baked into the screen display. The screen flicked on, a squad of voidsmen in an empty hallway. A hand clamped to Catalyst's chair. "Junior Augur Chief?" The Augermaster gave Catalyst a single glance before studying the vid screen. Catalyst could only point at the screen and stammer.
"Oi! Bridge control!"
The sergeant met the camera's glassy eye.
"The lights down here are borked. We got any servitors here or what?"
The bald man rolled his eyes, exaggerating the gesture to ensure it was visible on the other end of the vid feed. He led his unit away, past the angle of the fisheye feed.
"Sent us into a caulking hallway. 2 pints in, thrown dammit. Couldn't have called any earlier."
Interrogator Ataman rubbed his temples and cursed the dead weight in his lap. The dim orange glow of his cabin's single lumen washed the brass and garnet of his master's rosette. "It should be with his body," Senka had said. "The retinue needs a leader. Are we holding elections?" Ataman had held up the rosette, unconsciously trying to match the silhouette of the identical symbol in the stained glass. "He endowed it to me." "Curious," is all Senka had replied. Curious. Ataman stood, crossing his cabin in 5 easy steps. He had paced his cubicle often in the past days. The happenings on Calvera had given him a surplus of thoughts to crowd his skull. They had spent standard days in warp translations since then. Few on the Holy Blood had paid him much attention. Once they exited the warp, offloaded the late Inquisitor's body, he would have his chance. He had the rosette, entrusted to him before the Lord Dantelian's death. That alone should buy him the ship and her crew. He was already an Inquisitor, as far as his standing on the vessel was concerned. Few aboard would deny an interrogator, let alone an Inquisitor postulant. The ones that lacked that faith weren't worthy to serve aboard an Inquisitor's vessel anyway. He caught his own sunken, bloodshot eyes in the mirror once, and swore not to do so again. He set the rosette gently onto the pillow of his cot and plucked the Capitaine hat from its hook near the door. Prayer, Ataman told himself, a witch hunter's truest weapon, wielded most efficiently when wielded against himself. The chapel was customarily dark. It was between services, lit only by the tallow candles in their niches and the immense ring-like chandeliers that were too high in the vaulted ceiling to practically offer much light. The buttresses and arches of the cathedral made for thickly shadowed corners, opaque and hungry black. Ataman avoided those corners. He eased himself into a front pew, hardly clasping his hands together when the wooden bench creaked again. Interrogator? A bald man in navy fatigue settled himself a few seats away. Inquisitor postulant, Ataman corrected, smoothing the edge of his Capitaine and setting it on the seat next to him. It's an empty cathedral, sir. Sergeant Talbrook, the man replied, offering a hand that went unshaken. The creases of his fingertips were traced with a ruddy, oily stain. The voiceman rolled his shoulders and leaned uncomfortably back into the pew. It's an empty cathedral, Sergeant Talbrook. Surely there are quieter pews for your reflections?
Aye, sir, there are, Talbot granted. I'm not here for reflection.
Adaman sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose.
Calvera was a mess, sir.
Talbrook looked to the empty altar at the cathedral's apse, idly playing at his collar.
We heard about it up here, and
the sergeant exhaled, shaking his head.
The Lord Dantalian was a light for all of us, but his loss must sting the worst for you.
Adaman cleared his throat, sniffed sharply through his nose. None of us are exempt from the Emperor's final call.
Aye.
The sergeant craned his neck, still nervously settling the chafing shoulders of his uniform.
Yet still an Inquisitor? He always seemed so...
When he couldn't find the words, Talbrook balled his fists, staring at the clenched fingers.
Inviolable.
Indeed, Adaman agreed half-heartedly. The Emperor alone decides when his servants are called to his side. Sergeant Talbrook made the sign of the Aquila as if Adaman had quoted a canticle. The voidsman then stood and straightened his tunic.
Before I forget, sir.
He opened the breast of his tunic, digging into the inside pocket.
You left this.
He handed Adaman the inquisitorial rosette, cast in hard brass and gemmed with garnet, the sergeant's thumb leaving a sticky, red-on-red smudge against the glassy surface shine. Adaman frowned. First surprise, then embarrassment, and finally a hiss of anger.
How did you...
His head snapped up. The pew was empty. The cathedral was empty. Flames wound and spiraled on the wicks of 100 candles, their light not reaching the corners of the cathedral's crevices. Adaman stood, clutching the rosette to his chest, the shadows of the chapel's buttresses and naves feeling far blacker, far deeper, and far hungrier. The bridge crews were exchanging. Old shift out, new shift in, maintaining constant, peak vigilance throughout the translation. Officers, menials, and orderlies shuffled around the bridge, changing posts with their relief. Catalan still watched the vid feed of an empty hallway. The alert rune had been forcibly reset to the machine spirit's disapproval. There was no breach. There was no enemy. Why then did Catalyst not trust his eyes? Another maintenance servitor had come hours earlier to change out the faulty lights. Catalyst had seen it do so. Still, the edges of the hallway swam with shadow. It moved, slithered, writhed across Catalyst's vid screen. A visual artifact, he had reasoned. A visual display error. An electric mishap, warp interference, unconvincing answers for unasked questions. Catalyst? The Augurymaster tapped him on the epaulet. The junior chief swiveled at his post. The Augurymaster and another officer waited for him. Estine, his second shift replacement. You'll be back in 6 hours. Best find some rest. Catalyst nodded, saluted, and left his post. He might have followed the Augurymaster's recommendation. He might have found his bunk, fallen asleep, and left the warped shadows of his vidscreen monitor to Estine. It would have given the younger officer something to do on his shift anyway. But Catalyst remembered the blackness, the shadows that cavorted where they should not have been, and he knew he could not forget that. It took one of his 6 rest hours to reach the level where the supposed breach had taken place, another to walk the distance between the lift and his destination. The heels of his boots tapped the hurried pattern of his footsteps, echoing quietly in the empty hallways. 10 more paces. 7, 5, 3. Catalyst rounded the corner and found... nothing. A hallway. Empty. The lights droned a mechanical whine above, flushing the narrow room with light. The chief augur officer hissed a held breath. A visual display error. An electric mishap. Warp interference. Answers he had dismissed resurfaced to humiliate him. Catalyst swore at himself, shook his head, and turned. And the hall went dark. He blinked. Once, twice, again. The augurman froze, taking short breaths. He squinted to parse some vague shapes out of his blindness. He couldn't. Not even the hand held before his face. He took a careful step, then another. On the third, the steel-shod toe of his boot collided with something hard, something unmoving, something that hadn't been there before. With a whimper, he staggered back.
Do you still want to find me?
Catalyst whimpered.
Do you want to see me, mortal?
Light came back to Catalys's eyes. Not much, not enough, but he could see the shape in front of him, contoured in the flickering light of electric bolts that played over its armor. He could smell the thick stink of old iron, blood, and saltpeter. He could see the jaws of fangs, ossified, set into a mask with gleaming red lenses. In the slow milliseconds it took for his brain to process the giant in front of him, Catalys had already accepted his death. Senka Driss pressed again at Adaman's door panel, listening for the muted buzzing of the alarm. There was no answer. "Fine," she murmured, hitting the door release instead. It rattled aside on dirty tracks. The smell was first, the stench of stale blood, as if she'd walk into a hive-slum butcher shop. Senka unfastened the clasp on one of her las pistol's holsters and stepped inside. It was hard to tell exactly how much of the mess was normal for the interrogator. While typically aggravatingly uptight about upholding the standards of an inquisitorial retinue, Adaman was more than engaged to his position. Spending so much time clutched to the Lord Dantelian didn't leave him much time to clean up his own effects. Spare clothes were folded next to an empty closet. The sink was sprinkled with trimmed facial hair. The smell was giving her a headache. Wrinkling her nose, Senka turned to leave the cluttered little cubicle, and saw the cot. Settled there, on the pillow, was the head of a man that Senka had only met in passing. Bald, lined with wrinkles, the bare corner of a Navis Imperialis tattoo visible above the ragged flaps of pale skin that truncated his neck. Talbrook, she remembered the name, dimly, dead for some hours. Around the severed head, spread and drawn in the leaking viscera from the neck stump, was a familiar shape. A stylized eye, the rosette of the Inquisition, composed in garnet blood. She knew to run, to shout, for anyone, for anything. She clutched the handle of her pistol and turned, in time to see the door behind her eclipsed by a shadow-blackened giant, with clawed hand and a leering, fang-skulled face. Adaman had not left the church. His stomach growled and his eyes ached to shut, but still he sat, cupping the rosette in two hands. The smudge was barely visible on the dark garnet, but Adaman was sure it was blood. "Ridiculous," he spat at the shadows around him. "I am Dantelian's successor. This ship is mine. I have nothing to fear. I have nothing to repent."
Lies. Here.
The Inquisitor postulant jolted to his feet, banging his knee on the pew in front of him. He hissed and swore, eyes darting between darkened corners of the cathedral.
Are you not ashamed to speak falsely in front of your emperor?
Adaman's breath came in short bursts. Carefully, he edged himself out of the pew, still clutching the rosette, eyes still jumping between shadows and shades. "I have done nothing!" Adaman staggered into the nave, heeled boots stamping patterns under the thick piled runner.
As it speaks, it lies.
"Show me then!" Adaman spread his arms. "Show me my accuser!" He hadn't expected it to work. As he turned to the cathedral's immense effigy of the God Emperor of mankind, a speck of midnight slipped from the well of shadows at the statue's feet. It took time to render, to form, to coalesce into the immense form of an Astartes. Its armor was edged and baroque, spiked and fluted. The helm was faced with the half-skull of some fanged humanoid of Terran myth, immense membraned wings extending from either side. Its armor was an ever-shifting blue, bound and bisected with arcing shots of lightning. Its right arm ended in a massive claw, energy flickering from talon tip to talon tip. Warp trickery! Fear dripped away, a void filled by hate. He gripped the rosette. "Servants of chaos!"
We have many gods,
the Astartes granted.
but no masters.
"A bastard son of the Eighth, then? My lord told me the spawn of Conrad Kurz are fond of those trite little platitudes."
Your lord.
The Night Lord stepped closer, stopping at the top of the apse's stairs.
Have you not lost the right to call him that?
Adaman licked his lips. "Calvera was a tragedy. The Lord Dantelian
Was murdered by his own interrogator.
Adaman swore he saw the skull-faced helm grin.
There are memories in blood, mortal.
I don't have to prove myself to you. Adaman backed down the chapel's nave, keeping his eyes on the heretic. The shadows pressed in against him, threatening to swallow his vision, his self, whole. I had a chance. The rejuvenat treatments weren't working anyway. He would have died in the end. Are you of all warp-spat creatures, going to lecture me about murder?
No, the Astartes hissed. I am not going to lecture you.
He blinked. The Night Lord was gone, back into the shadows that had birthed it. Adaman turned to run, yet the Night Lord was there. Impossibly, claws outstretched, buzzing with blue energy. Adaman practically ran into them himself. 4 searing slits of frigid pain, splitting through the interrogator's gut. He spluttered. He coughed. The Night Lord lifted its arm, bringing his head closer to its fang-toothed helmet.
You had your chance. You should have done more with it, mortal.
With a sickening schlick, the Inquisitor postulant slipped from the heretic's claws, piled into a leaking tangle on the red runner that stretched the cathedral's length. Adaman shuddered, his eyelids sliding closed. The Astartes turned, stalking down the nave with careful steps that belied its size. It slipped into the darkness that shut Adaman's eyes, disappearing with the hiss of promised bloodshed into the waiting corridors of the Holy Blood. Thank you all so much for watching or listening to this episode. If you enjoy these types of one-off shorter stories outside of the usual Lions of Gorgoth narrative series, do let me know. I would love to work a few more of these into my content creation schedule with a little bit more time for some editing and revising. Anyway, drop me a comment if you have any story suggestions for next time. While you're down there, why not drop a like and hit all the other YouTube buttons? I know it's a cliche, but it really does help us channels out and it tickles the machine spirit in just the right way. Subscribe and turn on notifications to not miss another story or another mediocre attempt at Night Lords, and until we meet again, friends, be safe, be kind, and don't you dare go hollow. Happy Halloween, folks.